Hey everybody, and welcome back to our scenario playthrough series. We are on scenario number 8 today. This is Katie's World. If you're not familiar with Katie's World, this is a park based off of Lightwater Valley in the UK, or at least what Lightwater Valley used to be. And that big coaster there in the back, Storm, is the iconic Ultimate, which is sadly no longer with us. I've actually never made it to Lightwater Valley because I intended to go during 2020 to ride the Ultimate, but unfortunately it was closed for COVID, and by the time they reopened, they had made the decision to get rid of the ride, so unfortunately I have never been to the park, but all the coasters and the other rides here are based off of stuff that is in the real Lightwater Valley, so we're going to take our usual kind of realistic type approach to this. Goal is to get a park value of $150,000 by the end of October year 3, which shouldn't be too hard because we got a lot of space to work with. So we're just zooming around the map right now looking to see what we have to work with, which isn't a whole heck of a lot so far. But we've already got a pretty sizable park to start with. The Storm is a fairly good sized coaster, so we can charge a lot for it. The one that's underground there is meant to represent an old Schwarzkopf Wildcat, so that one can also be raised up as far as the cost goes, and gets us a little bit of a start. We don't have staff to begin with, nor do we have any stalls or restrooms or any of that, so we need all that to get ourselves going to a little bit of a viable park. So we're going to start with placing down a couple of those bits and pieces here. This train in the middle that you see is interesting because it's a tiny little layout, but it's got 3 whole stations, and it just feels like way too many. By the time you just get started, you're already stopping at the next station and you're getting off. So I want to revise that train at some point during our playthrough and also get rid of those giant hills on the thing, as we typically talk about. So we're going to play around with that a little bit later on, but right now we need to actually start making a viable park before we get into adjusting stuff. We're also going to eventually adjust the 2 main coasters too, because I want to do some, hopefully a little bit of realistic type changes to it to help out and just make it look a little nicer perhaps. But we've already got the info kiosk and the bathrooms and some pizza and all that, so we're going to start with that and then drop down our first ride here with the carousel. Typically we put the carousel towards the entrance, like in some kind of a plaza area, but this park isn't suited for that. It just doesn't have a great entry experience. So instead we're going to pick a kind of nice natural scenic spot for the thing, so we're going to overlook that little pond there in the middle with the boat hire. And that boat hire, by the way, with the one black swan, is where I get the thing where I always paint one of mine black as well. So this one has a good memory from childhood, I suppose, that I always used to do that, and I still carry that on today. So we'll drop a scrambler in there and put another thrill ride there, even though it's, I use thrill ride loosely with that type of attraction, but it is what it is. So I want to put down a car ride while we wait for other stuff to get researched, and I'm trying to figure out the best spot for this because there's a lot of open spaces, but I also don't want to take a prime coaster space. And we're going to start here in the corner instead, because I think this is a nice little way to make a compact little car ride and do a little bit of elevation change in here. I don't typically like to place stuff super close to the park edge, but I mean, we can screen it a little bit with a bit of fences and other things like that. So we're going to use this kind of not super suitable terrain to make something hopefully kind of interesting. And drop down and up, and it's one of those things that I'm trying to learn a little bit on doing car rides, is that I typically would make them on flat ground and kind of cruise around, and that's about it. And I don't typically like to go up off the ground because it just feels weird having these car rides on stilts, but I'm trying to get a little bit beyond that to make some more interesting layouts, because I think they can do more than I was typically using them for. So we'll build ourselves a little entrance here and get this whole thing packaged up. I put one section in there with that final corner into a tunnel, because that's going to let us do a little bit of work here to screen the ride in the back from that queue for the coaster, because I don't really want guests to look at this and kind of mistake that queue as the queue for this. It's a little bit weird because there's no kind of signage or anything like that that tells you what's going on under there. You're just kind of getting in and assuming something interesting is on the other side. We will eventually get to putting a little bit of theming on that entrance area, but that'll be a little while later on. Fences are probably the most useful thing when it comes to car rides, just for decorating all the bits and pieces and then some of those topiaries and things like that. So I'm going to go for the forested approach here with the bushes and some of the trees, and we're going to use a couple of different kinds of fence on this just to make it kind of up here in the hills a little bit. I kind of went with some of these darker trees. We're using stuff that's already found on the map, which I think works just fine, but I don't want to go too off pattern from what is already here and given to us in the scenario. Now I'm going to drop a haunted house on this side, which kind of helps to fit this overall vibe of, I don't know, more spooky-ish, I guess, on this side with those darker trees and everything. And we're going to put this kind of dirt path and then a little bit of a queue here in some mounded up earth and things like that. And then we can use the natural hillside here to make this haunted house look maybe a little more imposing than it might otherwise have been, which I think looks alright. It does, unfortunately, kind of reinforce the issue we had before where there's that queue in the middle, and it's like, well, what does that go to? Because clearly the one on the right goes to the haunted house, the one on the left goes to the car ride, but where's that one in the middle go to? So again, we'll need to throw some scenery in there a little bit later, but I always do like trying to do maybe a little bit of an approach to the haunted house here with some different kinds of paths, of course our spooky fence as we usually do, and a couple bits and pieces of trees and things like that, although I'm cognizant of trying not to block the overall visual of that thing from the main pathway too. I'm going to use some of those topiaries as well, just to give it a little bit of entry presence there, and kind of get that going. So that whole side of the park now is built out pretty well with 4 attractions there in a pretty tight area. So we're going to focus our attention now onto this side up here by the go-karts. Put a little spiral slide up here on the hill because that seems like a nice spot for it. You'll be able to see that as you walk along that kind of entry path there on the left with the dirt. So that's a decent little starting spot as we continue to research, trying to figure out what we've got to work with. And I'm not really happy with the coasters as of yet. I don't really want to build a bobsled here yet anyway. We're not going to in this scenario, but it just didn't really seem like the right one for me, so we avoided it. We do have a log flume, however, so this area here in the back with this kind of weird valley out towards the park edge kind of made the right spot for this. Log flumes are great for kind of unsuitable ground areas, since a lot of these are meant to be up off the ground a little bit, as long as it's, you know, not too far up off the ground for too long. And yes, I understand there's exceptions to that in real life as well. I just visually like the look of more or less following the terrain and trying to make it kind of blend in with its surroundings. It's a weird layout here where there's that swinging ship that's down there kind of on the bottom edge of the map, and it's kind of in that valley, and it's not really connected to anything. It's kind of hard to get to, so I'm trying to work around it at the moment, and I'm trying to work around the ultimate, or storm, I guess, here, and I end up with this really high up off the ground section, and as you can see, it doesn't look very good. Like I just got done saying, it's not really that suitable for a good log flume layout. So we're trying to figure out the best way to mess with this, and it's not working, I don't think. So the ending thought here is, you know, maybe we do something a little bit different and we try and move that swinging ship and put it somewhere else. So we're actually going to drop another one up here, and then we'll eventually delete that other one here as well. Looking at a couple different angles to stick the thing, and eventually we're going to go for the head-on approach there. Typically I like to have it approached from the side so you get that swinging profile, but it didn't quite fit in there. I didn't necessarily want to mess with it too much, but this lets us delete that down there and get rid of this kind of long dead end of pathway. And not that dead ends aren't, you know, fairly realistic and common in parks, but I just didn't like this idea of going all the way down that hill, having the swing ship in an area that nobody's really going to see it until they get up on it, and then you got to go back to get out of there. So instead, it's going to let us rework this just a little bit and do some additional bits and pieces here. So we got our splashdown section there. We got a long straight section afterwards because we want the thing to slow down to the normal speed before we do any turns on the thing. We'll go ahead and place a turn there and have our station here. You want your station relatively close after the final drop because the final drop's the exciting part, and you really don't want to have this sort of anticlimactic ride where you have this great drop and then it goes on for another 5 or 6 minutes, and you lose all that adrenaline and excitement that you had from the first one or from the first section. So we're going to end it relatively quickly, and now we can look at how to fit in this whole thing. So I'm looking at a couple of different options here, kind of crossing over itself a couple times and trying to use this space fairly well. It is decently unsuitable in terms of landscape to build a lot of interesting stuff, especially one that's going to follow the terrain, but that's part of the challenge, and I think what we're going to do instead is go onto the backside of this hill here and then do a little bit of more terrain type work and get it over to this side. Typically I like to have kind of a medium drop and then a large drop at the end if I can. Not that that's any kind of hard and fast method by any means, but I just like the idea of having sort of that like mid excitement in the middle of the ride and then the ending excitement of the larger drop. And to be fair, this isn't exactly a huge drop, but I don't think it needs to be. Game-wise, these Flumes seem to be pretty popular no matter what kind of size drop you've got, but I decided that I really didn't want to do anything like super huge. So looking at the entrance here and the exit, the station's kind of in an awkward spot in general on the side of this hill, so we're going to wrap the queue around the back side of the thing, and then we got to get the exit out from that island with the ride that circles around the whole thing. So the challenge that we've got there is we got to go either up or down, and either one is going to impact the terrain a little bit and get rid of some of the trees that we've got there. Unfortunately, the clearances in some of these areas with those 2x2 corners don't really allow us to do too much, so we could either do that where we have this kind of weird cantilevered bit on the pathway, or we can go down, and I think in the end the right way is to go down. Custom scenery can make that look a whole heck of a lot better, but in this instance, of course, we're doing vanilla on this, so we are going to just do the best that we can. I'll reduce the number of boats a little bit, just because I don't want this to stretch all the way back to the drop when the thing breaks down and gets clogged up, and in general, I don't typically like to use the full amount that it gives you, just because it feels like way too many in general. Going to put back some of these trees and probably add a couple of more because we demolished a lot of those things here in this kind of first go around when we were doing our trial and erroring of this coaster. I'll put a little side pathway there as well just for viewing for the splashdown, because it's really not in a great spot overall from a viewing standpoint. There's not a super good spot to stand to actually see this ride. You're really actually only going to see the bulk of the ride from the queue, and then from the exit you don't see anything, of course. So we're going to put that little walkway there. Not the guests are really going to use it for its intended purpose, of course, in the game as it stands like here, but that's okay. We can still pretend. So now we've got this little area built out pretty well, another 4 rides in that section, and I think that looks alright. So now we are at a point where we've got a couple more coasters to build, and or at least a couple more coasters that have been researched that we can build. And looking at it initially, I think the steel looping coaster is probably going to be our first one. I had initially eyed this entrance area here as a great spot for a proper shuttle loop. And we did one in Forest Frontiers, but it was a little bit condensed and not as realistic as it could have been. So I wanted to see about putting it right there, because it's just kind of long and narrow and not super suitable for anything else. But the problem about putting it right up against the edge of the map is that you can only have the entrance and the exit on a single side, because you need the you need 2 spaces on either side of the entrance platform to actually get the hut and then the path. And I'm not really a fan of having entrances and exits on rides on the same side. It's just not as super realistic. Yes, I understand there are instances where that is a thing, but for me here, I just want to have it more of the enter on one side, exit on the other, and go in that direction. So instead of putting it there, we're going to take this opportunity to reroute the train a little bit. And again, trains are one of those kind of opening day attractions that you really don't see added after a park is open, because they're such a high expenditure that it's a lot easier to lump it in the overall cost of a park build rather than in an addition, because you're just never going to get the return that a ride like this would cost versus the amount of people that it's going to bring in. So this is an opening day attraction, and opening day attractions I feel better about putting big tunnels and things like that for a exact reason that I just said, that it's easier when all the costs are lumped together in one big go of things. So we're going to get rid of 2 of the 3 stations. We're also going to add 2 tunnels to get through some of our areas here, and we're going to hide some of these little climbs inside the tunnel. Not that you can't do any climbs on it, I just don't like to do too many, because I really don't like to see the train slow down to this like super big struggle to get up those hills, or just gain some ridiculous amount of speed to get down the thing. So we're going to just leave a single station there, make it a little longer so we can have 2 trains on it. This layout is probably still too small for 2 trains, to be honest, but from a capacity standpoint, we'll roll with it and it's fine. So we've got a little bit of weird landscaping there that we'll fix up here in a bit, but the benefit here is that now we have an unused entrance and exit station or entrance queue and exit path for the train that we can now use for the purposes of our coaster. So we're going to use a booster section on this one, because although the powered launch is part of the thing, you also have this continual acceleration through the rest of it, and more realistic this way to have continued propulsion through the thing. So we're going to give it a little bit of launch to start, and then we'll use those boosters to get the rest of the way. Real Schwarzkopf shuttle loops have this whole section of brakes there at the end as well, so we're going to use those too, just to make this realistic. And you can see here how much space these things take up. Yeah, they're super narrow, but they're incredibly long. So just one thing to keep in mind if you decide you want to build one of these in your park, you gotta have a lot of space to work with. So we got ourselves a drink stand here, which is good because we didn't have any drink stuff. We just had the food with the pizza so far, so this checks a box that the guests will need. So we're going to create a little plaza here and some bits of gardens and some fences and things just to dress it up a little bit, because we haven't really done a whole lot of that, and to be honest, I don't think we did that nearly as well as it could have been in this map. I would probably do things maybe a little bit differently if I looked at this again, but part of the fun of this is building it as it comes to you and not doing a whole heck of a lot of pre-planning, really thinking about it through as I'm doing the stream. So part of that is the fun of it, I suppose. So we've got our first major new coaster added in. We did a little bit of landscaping there to make the train look a little bit better, adding some fences in and some other bits and pieces there as well. And now we've got a cool entrance feature too. Imagine coming in through that entry arch there, and you have this giant loop on the left. This train rattles through every couple of minutes, so I think that's a pretty cool spot to put that thing. It does limit the amount of ability to do a threading of that loop with some other ride, like you'd see at Knott's Berry Farm, for example. That was one of the requests in chat, which we didn't end up doing just because it's right up against the edge of the map, and there's really nothing we can do about it. So I am going to build a new ride that I have not done so far in the scenario playthrough series. This is the spinning coaster, and I haven't built it so far because it's relatively terrible, as it turns out, not just from a gameplay standpoint, but just from it has no pieces available that it should have. This coaster type should have pretty much every piece that the Steel Wild Mouse has, but it doesn't. It has small and medium corners, it has shallow drops, and then it has the ability to unlock and lock the spinning. So we are going to do the best that we can to make a layout fairly similar to the stock model layout here. The original one of these was from Reverchon in France, and Zamperla and others have since done their own versions of this. So we're building it right here, although this isn't where it's going to eventually live. I just wanted a nice open spot so I could see exactly how big it was going to be, and then we're going to save the design and we're going to move it. I'm also starting to get through here on the block brakes and everything, since these coasters have a lot of block brakes, and one of the things you want to make sure when you do the designs for these is, can they make it around if the block brake stops the ride? So that's why these switchbacks have little dips in each of these sections, and that's why we're making sure that those block brakes are opened up a little bit. I don't want to trim off all the speed, but you still want to make sure that you can, if needed, be able to get the ride back if it actually stops in a block section at any one point. We've got ourselves an entrance and an exit station as well, and the intention here with the unlocking and the locking of the spinning is that it only unlocks on the second set of slaloms, like the lower level there, like the real thing. And the real coasters here, the first upper section is done with the ride facing forward, and the lower section is done with the free spinning. That's not actually always the case on some of these rides, but it is a thing on the bulk of them, and that's how it comes standard. So I got to mess around a little bit with the unlocking and locking. It's not a super intuitive system, if we're being honest, but that's just fine. We can make it work, and here we got it going. So we can do some adjustments here and get ourselves looking good for the whole thing. So now we need to make a little bit of money and bulk ourselves up for more, but having that big coaster here and then having this one's going to help us out a little bit as far as all that goes. So a little bit of adjustment here to the brakes to make sure that the thing operates correctly. Generally, I tend to build the layout first and then screw around with the brakes a little bit later. It's just easier for me to build the layout and then go through and make those adjustments afterwards. It takes a little bit more time, but that's fine. So now that we've got a full coaster here that's already built, we just got to wait for the stats to generate so we can go ahead and save the thing and we can move it to the right spot. So the right spot, I think, is going to be this corner right here because it fits pretty well and we can't really get too much in there. I raise a block of land so the thing sits up off the ground like it should, and now we've got a nice little coaster kind of settled into the side here. So Lightwater Valley went into a fair bit of decline here after taking out, before taking out the Ultimate and taking out some of the other rides and attractions and everything as well. And they've kind of repositioned themselves as a children's park. And I think they're doing probably okay in that market right now, but it definitely is kind of a shell of what the park was at one point. So the park seems like it would be more viable to afford something like this, which is a kind of standard traveling type coaster. So that was one of the reasons that I decided to go with this, and also go with kind of older rides that they might have been able to pick up used perhaps. So that's why we get the Shuttle loop in there as well. And the next coaster we're going to build is also an older style too, if you can guess what it is. So there we go with our yellow and pink color scheme. Kind of an ugly scheme in general, or well, maybe not ugly, but it's just bright. But it is one of the standard color options that you see on a lot of those, so I think we will be fine to go with it. We since unlocked the swinging inverter ship, which again, I don't really love these just because you're so hemmed in with where you can put your entrance and your exit, but it's a good ride and it certainly adds to park value, so you can't discount the fact that it's fairly useful for this kind of a scenario. So we'll go ahead and place it up on the hill here so we can get a good view of it as you're coming in, just trying to get a nice spot for the thing that's a bit out of the way as well. Drop in a couple of more stalls there. I'm not super interested in diversifying our food and beverage options just because we've got everything we need there with food and drink. So from a guest needs standpoint, they're both checked, and I'd rather be spending my time and money researching rides than I would be researching food stalls and that sort of thing. In the longer scenarios, or the scenarios where we have more stuff unlocked to begin with, then sure, I will gladly go for a good variety there, but I gotta prioritize what we're doing, and that's the plan anyway. At this point, I found out that the park was closed, and I'm not entirely sure what happened there and when that happened, but we were down to not very many guests at this point, which was kind of a bit of an issue, but you know, it's all right because we found it, we reopened it, and now we're going to build our car ride here, which is going to be the last little attraction here that we're going to build for today's episode. I have no idea why the bright yellow scheme is a default color scheme. I don't know of any car ride that's got this kind of bright color look, but you know, it's certainly easy to find. We're going to change that though here. And using this one area that I did discount initially for a future coaster spot, I decided that I wanted to put coasters on the other side, so we are going to leave this one as it is. Go with the racing cars since we did the sports cars on the other side. And now this gives us another attraction just to add to our park, raise the soft guest gap a little bit, even though it's not really doing a whole heck of a lot. So that is going to be it for today. Take a look at those coaster selections there and see which one you think is going to be next, and we will get into that on the next episode. So as always, thanks very much for watching, and we'll catch you next time. Bye now.